Down there, life continues. The traffic is awful, stocks go on trading, and Star Trek is still showing.
Good day, grade 8 learners. Welcome to the first live lesson of term 1. My name is Pathuchetso Singo, and this lesson is proudly brought to you by the Harding Department of Education. In today's lesson, we're going to be learning under the knowledge area life and living. The topic is photosynthesis and respiration. Now let's move on to the lesson objectives. So these are the goals that we want to achieve by the end of today's lesson. So at the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify the main source of energy, explain the need for energy by living organisms, explain the process of photosynthesis, identify the requirements and products of photosynthesis, and write the word equation for the process of photosynthesis. Then explain the process of respiration, identify the requirements and products for respiration. Then we're going to write the word equation for respiration. All this is sourced from your CAPS document on page 35. All right, now let's move on to pre-knowledge. So here we're going to remind each other of what we've learned in the previous grades. If you remember, in grade 5 and in grade 6, we were introduced to the topic photosynthesis. If you remember, we learned about the different ways in which the process occurs. Then in grade 6 and in grade 7, we were introduced to potential energy. We're introduced to potential energy. If you remember, we learned that potential energy is energy that is stored in a system. We also learned about kinetic energy as well and the difference between the two types of energy. So now that we are done with our pre-knowledge, let's move on to the baseline activity. These are just a few questions that's just to jog your memory. So I'm going to read out the questions, give you time to answer the questions, and then after that, we are going to answer the questions together. So I'm going to read the questions now. The first question reads, list the 7 life processes. List the 7 life processes. Then the second question reads, choose the words from the box to complete the following sentences. Write the sentences out in full. So I'm going to read the words in the box. So it's organic and inorganic material, photosynthesis, water, air, roots, sand, and rocks. All right, sand and rocks. So the first question 2A reads, the process when the green plants parts of plants make food is blank, so you need to fill in that blank. Then water and minerals are absorbed by the blank of plants, and then soil is made up of blank, 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 and blank. So answer those questions. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to answer these questions. Then after 5 minutes, we will do the solutions together. Reads, list the 7 life processes. Do you remember them? Well, the 7 life processes are movement, reproduction, sensitivity, growth, breathing, expression, and feeding. Those are the 7. And then now let's answer question 2. Choose words from the word box to complete the following sentences and write the sentences out in full. Now, the process when the green parts of plants make food is named photosynthesis. It is named photosynthesis. And then B, to be, water and minerals are absorbed by the blank of plants. Do you know the word? It is roots. They are absorbed by the roots of plants. And then C, soil is made up of blank, blank, and blank. Sand, rocks, organic and inorganic material. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to copy down the corrections, and then after 2 minutes, we will continue with our lesson. Don't forget to keep the books and sheets of paper where you wrote your responses. So see you after the 2 minutes. Welcome back. Now let's move on to the terminology section. Now here we're going to learn what some terms mean. These will help us to understand the concepts that we're going to learn in today's lesson. So let's define a few terms. The first term is chemical potential energy. This is the energy that is stored in the food that organisms eat. The next term, chloroplast. Chloroplast, these are small structures which are inside the cells of leaves and stems of green plants. They are small structures that are inside the leaves and stems of green plants. And then radiant energy. Radiant energy. This is the form of energy that the sun provides. The form of energy that the sun provides. And then soluble. Soluble, this means it is able, or a substance that is able to dissolve in water. And then insoluble, it's the opposite of soluble. It is a substance that cannot dissolve in water. A substance that cannot dissolve in water. Now let's see what else we have under terminology. Interdependency. interdependency. This is a relationship in which both parties depend on each other for something. A relationship in which both parties depend on each other for something. And interaction. Interaction, this is a relationship in which two parties affect each other. A relationship in which two parties affect each other. Then chlorophyll. Chlorophyll, this is the green pigment in the cells of plants that absorb radiant energy. Next, photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, this is the process whereby green plants use light energy from the sun, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the soil to produce food in the form of glucose and oxygen. And then glucose, this is a simple sugar. It is a simple sugar. Then chemical reaction. Chemical reaction, this is a process in which one or more substances are converted into one or more different substances or products. All right, and then respiration. Respiration, the second part of our topic. Respiration, this is the process by which energy is released from food in a series of chemical reactions. And then byproduct. This is a secondary product made in the synthesis of something else. Okay, so we are done with our terminology. Now let's learn about the need for energy. The need for energy. So all organisms, they need energy to sustain life. They need energy to sustain life. So the energy that is in an ecosystem is linked to food because food is stored, energy is stored in the food compounds inside plants and animals. And what is our main source of energy? The main source of energy is the sun. So the sun is the main source of energy in an ecosystem. So energy flows from the sun to plants, then to the animals in an ecosystem. So there is a flow of energy between plants and animals. So the energy is going to come from the sun to the plants and then to the animals in an ecosystem. So there is an interdependency between your plants and your animals. If you remember, we learned about different types of plants and animals, and they all belong to the 5 kingdoms. They all belong to the 5 kingdoms, and they're all dependent on each other for energy, and they all depend on the energy that comes from the sun for survival. They all depend from the energy that comes from our main source for survival. So now we know that the sun is the ultimate source of energy for all the living things that we find on earth. So green plants, remember green plants depend on the energy that comes from the sun to make their own food. So only green plants can photosynthesize. So how do these green plants make their own food? Right, they capture the sun's energy through the process of photosynthesis. And then animals depend on the plants for food and energy. So the sun provides all living things with energy. So our main source of energy is actually the sun. So I've just pulled up an illustration here just to show that the sun is our main source of energy. You can see sunlight going onto the plants, then going onto that water reservoir. So the sun is the main source of energy. It is the main source of energy. Now continuing under the need for energy. So each living organism requires or needs a certain amount of energy each day to perform the life processes. Remember the life processes from our baseline activity. I'll remind you a little bit later. Now the energy in an ecosystem is linked to food because energy is stored in food. So energy is stored in food. So living organisms need to have access to food in order to harness, or rather to have access to capture that energy. And energy is measured in joules and in kilojoules. Now, just a reminder of the 7 life processes. So all these processes require energy for a living thing, whether be it a plant, be it an animal, or any other microorganism. So they require energy for nutrition, for reproduction, for excretion, for growth, sensitivity, respiration, and movement. They require energy for all these processes, and all these processes ensure that the plant doesn't die, or the animal doesn't die, and it survives and keeps living and reproduces and creates more generations of that same species. So how does energy flow from the sun to plants to animals? Now, photosynthesis is the first step. It is the first step in the movement of energy in an ecosystem. It's step number 1. So during photosynthesis, what happens? What happens is the energy. So the process of photosynthesis, you remember from the definition, it gives us, or it produces, glucose. And then energy is stored within that simple sugar, within that simple molecule. Now, the plants that belong to an ecosystem, they break down some of the glucose and release energy for their own life processes. Remember, the plant has to survive and go on. So the plant requires energy for its own life processes. Now, what happens to the rest? Because the plant doesn't use all of the glucose that it produces. So now, the plants convert some of the glucose into starch for storage in their roots, their stems, their leaves, in fruits and seeds. So the plant will use some of the glucose for the life processes, and then will store the rest. They'll store the rest. I just pulled out a picture there just to show you some of the plants. So there's a carrot. Remember, a carrot is this orange part, that's the root. And then we also have other roots as well. We have a potato there, we've got ginger, you can see an onion in the corner there. So the plants use some of the glucose that it produces from the process of photosynthesis, and uses it to break down. It breaks down the glucose to release energy for the 7 life processes, and then the rest is converted into starch and stored. Now, let's talk about storage of glucose, the storage of glucose. So the energy stored in glucose and starch in the plants is then passed on to herbivorous animals. Do you see now the flow of energy? Energy started off from the sun, and then it flowed onto the plants via the process of photosynthesis. And then now it's flowing onto the herbivores. How? So glucose and starch are broken down inside the herbivore's body to release energy. But how does the herbivore access that energy? It does so by eating the plants. Remember, herbivores eat plants. They eat plants. So once the herbivore, whether it's the fruit of the plant, the seed of the plant, the stem of the plant, the leaf of the plant, or the root of the plant, then that herbivore can access, or can harness, can access the stored glucose and the stored starch. So then the herbivore will now use some of that energy that it got from eating the plant for life processes. But then it doesn't use all of the energy. It stores some of the energy in energy-rich compounds such as carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And there's a giraffe chewing on a part of a plant. I'm sure it's going to get some energy from that plant. Now, let's talk more on this flow of energy. So now, so far, energy has flowed from the sun to plants and then to herbivores. Now, when a carnivorous animal eats another animal, so these are animals that eat other animals. It takes the energy-rich compound from that animal's body. Remember, so if a carnivore it's a herbivore, it's going to get all the energy-rich compounds from that animal's body. Remember, they were stored in the form of carbohydrates, they were stored in the form of proteins, and they were stored in the form of fats. So when the carnivore eats that animal, it will get that energy. Now, what happens next after devouring the herbivore? What happens next is the carnivore uses some of the energy for life processes. It is a living organism. It needs to go through the life processes, and those life processes are driven by energy. They require energy. So the carnivore is going to use some of the energy for life processes, and then will also store the rest in carbohydrates, proteins, and fats in its body. Now, the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are broken down inside the carnivore's body to release the energy that they contain. In case the carnivore needs to run, that's movement. The carnivore needs to respire, that's respiration. And the carnivore needs to reproduce. The carnivore needs to grow. The carnivore needs to be sensitive to its surroundings. And all this requires energy. And there is a lion uh, eating another animal. There's a lion eating a herbivore. So we've got different carnivores, we've got lions, and we've got tigers as well. Now, let's move on to our first activity in today's lesson. So question number 1. What is the main source of energy on Earth? For 1 mark. Number 2, why are animals dependent on plants for energy? I'm giving you 3 minutes to answer these questions, so take out your pens and books quickly and then write down the solutions to these questions. So see you after 3 minutes. Let's revise together. So what is the main source of energy on Earth? It is the sun. If you wrote the sun, give yourself a mark. And then why are animals dependent on plants for energy? Remember, energy is stored in food and animals cannot produce their own food. So they depend on the plants for energy. Alright, so I'm going to give you a quick minute to copy down the corrections and then we move on to the process of photosynthesis. Welcome back. Now let's move on to the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so we are going to learn about the process. So we know now that plants rely on the sun for energy. The sun is the main source of energy. And we know that plants make their food through the process of photosynthesis. But then now let's move on to the details. Let's move on to the details of the process of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the process whereby green plants, don't forget to mention green plants, use light energy. Where does this light energy come from? It comes from the sun. So the process whereby green plants use light energy from the sun. What else do they use? They use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. What else do they use? Water from the soil. Remember, plants are rooted in the soil. To do what? To produce food. What are the products of photosynthesis? So the products of photosynthesis are glucose and oxygen. Those are the two products of photosynthesis. So there's the picture just to show you what I've been explaining. So I've just defined the process of photosynthesis and here's the plant. Here's the plant. So the plant uses light energy from the sun, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and water from the soil to produce these two, glucose and oxygen. To produce glucose and oxygen. All right. So where does photosynthesis happen? Where does it happen? Photosynthesis happens in a small structure called chloroplasts. Where are the chloroplasts? The chloroplasts are inside the cells of the leaves and stems of green plants. So where do we find them? We find them inside the cells of green plants. It could be the stem of that green plant or the leaf. Only if the stem is green. Now, inside the chloroplast, we find something special inside. We find green pigments. So inside the chloroplast are green pigments, and these green pigments are called chlorophyll and gives the plant its green color. There is a picture, so we've got a leaf in this particular case, and then this represents, I'm going to circle it, it represents the cells of the leaf, and inside the cells of the leaf we find chloroplast, and inside the chloroplast we find a green pigment. What is that? It is chlorophyll. It is chlorophyll. So this is where photosynthesis happens, inside the chloroplast. Now, the process of photosynthesis has an equation. Remember, we said it is a chemical reaction, and we represent chemical reactions in equations. So the photosynthesis process now takes place through a series of chemical reactions. It takes place through a series of chemical reactions, and these reactions can be summarized as follows. Carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll to give us glucose and oxygen. What is this? This grade 8, it is a chemical reaction. Now, it is called a word equation. It is called a word equation. It summarizes the chemical reaction of the process of photosynthesis. So, carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of sunlight. Remember, sunlight is our source of energy. The sunlight is our source of energy. And who helps us grab that energy? It is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll helps the plant to capture that energy from the sun, capture that radiant energy from the sun. Who helps us? It is chlorophyll. Then the process goes on where we react carbon dioxide and water to get what? Glucose, the simple sugar, which is the food. And what else do we get? We get oxygen. So the products for photosynthesis are two: glucose and oxygen. And the requirements, what do we need for this whole process to happen? We need all these that are behind the arrow. We need carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, we need water, we need energy from the sun, and we need that green pigment that is going to capture the energy from the sun. And that green pigment is chlorophyll. All right, so what is glucose? We have said glucose is a simple sugar. Glucose is a simple sugar and the simplest form of food. So the plant, during photosynthesis, it absorbs water from the soil and carbon dioxide from the air. And what does it do with it? It goes through the process of photosynthesis and produces glucose. What happens to the glucose? That glucose is stored in the plant as food, and oxygen, which is a product that is produced when something else is being made. So in this case, the main product is glucose, and then our byproduct is oxygen. The oxygen is going to be released in the air. So there is a summary of the process of photosynthesis. So this is our sun, light energy, carbon dioxide plus water to give us your simple sugar and your oxygen. All right, that is the process of photosynthesis. So which brings us to activity number 2. I'm going to read out the questions and then give you time to answer them. First question reads, define photosynthesis. Define photosynthesis for 2 marks. The second question reads, what is the function of chlorophyll in a plant? And then the third question is, what are the requirements and products of photosynthesis, for 5 marks. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to answer these questions, so quickly grab your pens and papers to answer the questions. See you after 5 minutes. Welcome back. Now let's answer the questions together. Define photosynthesis. Do you remember how to define photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process whereby green plants use light energy from the sun, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and water from the soil to produce food in the form of glucose and oxygen. Now, what is the function of chlorophyll in a plant? Why do plants need chlorophyll? So, chlorophyll is very important. They need chlorophyll to capture the light energy and convert it to chemical potential energy. And then to remember the requirements for photosynthesis, what do we need for that process? Right, the requirements are carbon dioxide, sunlight, water, and chlorophyll. And the products, what are the products for photosynthesis? They are glucose and oxygen. Glucose and oxygen. So give yourself 2 minutes to quickly copy down the corrections. Then after 2 minutes, we will continue with our lesson. Welcome back. Now let's continue with our lesson. Now we're going to learn about respiration, the second part of today's topic. So what is respiration? Respiration is a process of releasing energy from food, and this process takes place in the body cell. So, what do we need for respiration? What are the requirements? So, this is a word equation to represent the chemical reaction, or rather, the process of respiration. What do we need for the process? We need glucose. We need glucose. What else do we need? We need oxygen. We need oxygen. And this process, where does it happen? It happens in small structures that are found inside the cell, and these are called mitochondria. And this is an illustration, rather a representation of mitochondria. And what does this process produce? What are the products? So the main product here is energy. We are breaking energy free from food, or rather we are releasing energy from food. So the main product is energy. But energy is not the only product. The other products are carbon dioxide, which plants need for photosynthesis, and water, which plants also need for photosynthesis. So this is respiration, glucose plus oxygen inside the mitochondria to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy, which is very important for the life processes. So all living organisms, that this includes plants and animals, they require or they need energy in order to survive. So energy is very, very important. It's a driving force behind survival and life. So respiration releases energy from food. So all living organisms, they go through the process of respiration to release food. Plants and animals both go through the process of respiration in order for them to break down the food and release energy that is very, very important for their survival, which is very, very important for their survival. So although plants make their own food, we have learned about the process of photosynthesis, and this is a process whereby plants make their own food. So although plants make their own food, they also have to break down that glucose that they produce. They have to break it down to release energy when it is needed. So plants also respire. So therefore, plants respire. And when do they do this? They respire in the absence of light. So they respire in the absence of light. Some may say in the dark, or some may say at night. So plants, they also go through the process of respiration because they need that energy from the glucose that they produce. They need it for whenever they need to perform different life processes. So plants also respire in the absence of light. In the absence of light, they also respire. All right. So what's the word equation for respiration? So we have the word equation for photosynthesis, but what is the word equation for respiration? Now, the word equation for respiration is glucose plus oxygen. So these two are the requirements, and they produce energy, which is the main product, and then we have our two byproducts, which are carbon dioxide and water. The two byproducts, which are carbon dioxide and water. So what do we need for respiration again? We need oxygen. So oxygen is a requirement for respiration. And what is the main product? The main product for respiration is energy. And what are the byproducts? They are carbon dioxide and water. So if you look at this picture that I've just pulled up, if you think about it, during the day, our plants, through the process of photosynthesis, they need carbon dioxide and water, which are the products of respiration. Now, respiration requires glucose and energy glucose and oxygen in order for the process of respiration to happen, and these happen to be the products of photosynthesis. So there is an interdependence. There is a dependence on all living organisms on each other. We all depend on each other. The plants depend on us to produce the requirements for photosynthesis, and we require plants in order for them to produce the requirements for respiration so that we can get energy and do the required life processes. So I spoke about byproducts of respiration, so I just would like to add more onto that. So there is our equation. We've got glucose and oxygen to produce energy, and carbon dioxide and water. We have said that these two are the byproducts. They are the byproducts. So the energy, what's going to happen to the energy? The energy will be used by the cells to do work. So the cells need energy in order for them to do work. Now, carbon dioxide, byproduct number one. Carbon dioxide byproduct number one is transported to the lungs and exhaled. And then water, it's going to form part of the blood. So that is what happens to the byproducts. Now let's talk about respiration and breathing. So why do we breathe? Why do you think we breathe? So since respiration requires oxygen to break down the food or the glucose in our body to unlock the energy that we need to do work, how can we get this oxygen? The only way we can get it is by breathing. So when you breathe in, your lungs are going to take out oxygen, and your body uses that oxygen for respiration. And then when you breathe out, your lungs get rid of that byproduct of respiration, which is carbon dioxide, which is produced from the process of respiration. So this is why we breathe. Now let's talk more about the process of breathing. So I've got a picture here that just shows how oxygen goes in. So when you inhale, you take in oxygen, and when you exhale, you take out carbon dioxide. So inhalation introduces oxygen into the body, a substance that doesn't normally get produced that is not produced in the body, and then it is used for respiration. So once respiration is done, then we have carbon dioxide being taken out of the body during exhalation. All right, so we've learned about photosynthesis and we've learned about respiration. Now, what are the differences between the two? What are the differences between these two very important life-driving processes? So I've got a table here with two columns. Column 1, we have photosynthesis, and column 2, we've got respiration. So we are going to compare these two. We're going to see how they are different. In the process of photosynthesis, food is made. So there is food that is produced. With respiration, food is broken down. Photosynthesis produces glucose from light energy, and respiration utilizes that glucose for energy. Carbon dioxide is used in photosynthesis, it's a requirement, and then carbon dioxide and water are products in respiration. Oxygen is produced in photosynthesis, and then oxygen is used in respiration. This process of photosynthesis only happens in chlorophyll containing plants, whereas respiration happens across. It happens in all living organisms. And then light is a very big important requirement. Light is needed for photosynthesis, and here with respiration, no light is needed. That's why our plants can respire in the absence of light. And then this process, the photosynthesis, occurs in chloroplast, and respiration occurs in mitochondria. So those are the two differences. Okay, let's move on to our last and our final activity. The question reads, tabulate the differences between photosynthesis and respiration. So let's tabulate those differences. Give yourself 5 minutes. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to tabulate the differences between photosynthesis and respiration. See you after 5 minutes. Welcome back. Now let's answer the question together. So the question reads tabulate. Tabulate means you have to draw a table. That is what tabulate means. So you draw a table, and within that table you put in the differences between photosynthesis and respiration. And when you are putting differences between two processes or between two objectives, now you need to show us where they're different. Like with photosynthesis, food is made. With respiration, the opposite happens. Food is broken down. So that's how you differentiate the two. So with photosynthesis, food is made. The process produces glucose from light energy. Carbon dioxide is used. Oxygen is produced. It only happens in chlorophyll containing plants. Light is a big requirement. Light is needed and occurs in chloroplast. With respiration, food is broken down. It uses glucose for energy. Carbon dioxide and water are produced. Oxygen is used and it happens in all living organisms. That is the difference here. And then no light is required and it occurs in mitochondria. So here we've got differences in where it happens, what is needed, and which organisms can perform this process. What else is needed? What is needed and what is used and what is produced from the two processes. Okay, now what have we learned today? Let's wrap up our lesson. So today we learned about the interactions and the interdependence in an ecosystem and how they are driven by the need for energy. We also learned that the sun is the important source of energy. It is the main source of energy. It provides light and heat for us for this very important process of food production by green plants, which is photosynthesis. And what does photosynthesis require? It requires carbon dioxide. It requires light from the sun. It requires water and chlorophyll to capture it. And we also learned about the products. What is produced? We will produce oxygen and we produce glucose. And where does this whole process happen? It happens in structures within the leaf and the stem of the green plants. And these structures are called chloroplasts. We also learned how plants and animals are dependent on each other. So through the process of photosynthesis, plants are able to make their own food and store it. Once they've stored it, the herbivore is going to feed on the plant, convert some of the food to energy for life processing, and then store the rest. Then the carnivore will feed on the herbivore and eat some of that stored energy that is in the form of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and then use the rest for its own life processes. So that is the dependence that we learned about. We also learned about the process of respiration. This process releases energy from food. It requires glucose and oxygen. Energy is the main product, and carbon dioxide and water are the byproducts. All right, in our next lesson, we're going to learn about ecosystems and feeding relationships. Until then, thank you so much for joining me in today's lesson. See you in the next one. Goodbye.